Do you know what June 23rd is? Besides just being another day in the week and day in the year, it is Gorgeous Grandma Day. And I want to say happy Gorgeous Grandma Day to all the gorgeous grandmas in the world. Today, I'm going to show you how to sew together this grandmother's star quilt block in honor of Gorgeous Grandma's Day. And of course, we're going to use some speed piecing techniques. I've got my fabric cut out and I'm ready to go. This is Penny Hallgren from quiltblocklibrary.com and quiltblocklibrary.tv. Let's join me at the sewing machine. This is a 9-patch quilt block, and it's got these little 4 patches in each one of the corners and in the center. They might be a little bit difficult to see because I've got a lot of dark purple here, but in any case we've got 5 little 4 patches, and instead of cutting my fabric into squares to sew together, I've cut the fabric into strips. So I'm going to sew these 2 strips together, and then I'll cut them apart so that I have pairs of patches, and then I'll sew them together to make my square patches that go in the corners and in the center. Just to show you what I've done, the first step was to sew these 2 strips together, and then I did press my seam allowance toward the darker fabric, and once I had that pressed, then I cut 2.5-inch sections off. So now I've got these 2.5-inch sections, and I'll sew them together and make 4 patches. And you can see that because these seam allowances are pressed facing the same dark fabric, when I put them together, facing right sides together, the seam allowances here butt up, and when I sew this together I'm going to get a nice square corner. So I'll go ahead and sew all of these patches together, and then I'll have my 4 patches that go in each one of the corners and in the center of the block. Now that these 4 patches are sewn together and put in their proper places, it's time to sew these isosceles triangles together. So I've got them stacked up here, and the first thing I'm going to do is just attach one of these long skinny triangles to the side of the isosceles triangles. And this is pretty easy to sew. You just put them right sides together and then sew down the 1/4-inch seam allowance. Now I've got one side of this done, and I'm ready to sew the other side on. A lot of quilters at this point would iron these seam allowances. I don't, because I like to have the flexibility of being able to pull or fold under to make the seam work so that I get nice sharp points on my tips. So I'm going to go ahead and sew these, line them up, and I'm going to face my seam allowances toward the darker fabric, which is going to be the outside of this central triangle. Now we're ready to sew this block together. I have cut off the tips here so that I can get a nice straight seam allowance between these 2, and then also I cut off the little triangle points on the ends of these isosceles triangles. So the first thing I'm going to do is I sew these together in rows, so I'm going to, or columns, so I'm going to fold these over and sew these 3 sets of patches straight down that way, and I'm going to leave the threads together between them so that I can keep them in the order that they need to be sewn together in the block. Now these 2 columns are sewn together, so I'm going to add this third column on, and I'm going to chain sew them and leave the stitching in between the patches. Now I've got the rows sewn together, so I'm just going to sew the rows together to make a block. So I'll fold the top row down into the center row and stitch across the top there. Now I've got the top 2 rows sewn together, and it's time to add this bottom row on, and then we'll be finished with the block. This grandmother's star quilt block is all ready to go into a quilt. And it was a little bit challenging, again, because you have these isosceles triangles. I don't know, I have a hard time sewing them together. In any case, with careful measuring and sewing, it can be a really pretty block. So to all you grandmothers out there, happy Gorgeous Grandma's Day on June 23rd. Thanks for joining me. This is Penny Hallgren from quiltblocklibrary.com and quiltblocklibrary.tv. If you're not already over there, go on over to quiltblocklibrary.com and get your free download of this pattern. There are also lots of other free patterns that you can download and hundreds of patterns for you to buy in all different sizes. Thanks again for joining me, and peaceful piecing.